The morning sun rose lazily over the small African town of Mbarica, its golden light spilling over the marketplace where gossip traveled faster than the wind. The people were busy preparing for the mayor's daughter's engagement party, the biggest event of the year. It wasn't just a celebration of love. It was a display of wealth, power, and class. The town's elite moved about in their best clothes, showing off imported jewelry and the latest cars. At the center of it all stood Linda Mutesa, beautiful, elegant, and proudly arrogant. She had just returned from studying abroad, and the townspeople whispered that she was destined to marry into one of the richest families in the country. Her father, Mayor Mutesa, was known for his strict belief in social hierarchy. "We are not like them," he would say, waving a hand toward the working class. "People like us dine with power, not poverty." That morning, a dusty old motorcycle rumbled into the compound, breaking the rhythm of chatter. It was the delivery man, a tall, quiet young man named Daniel. His clothes were simple, his face calm, his eyes deep with quiet confidence. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper, a delivery for the mayor's household. The guards eyed him with disdain. "Hey, delivery boy," one sneered. "You sure you're in the right place? The market's that way." Daniel smiled faintly. "This package is for Miss Linda Mutesa," he said politely. When Linda herself came out, her friends burst into laughter. "Oh, I see," one of them giggled. "The poor man wants to see Linda in person. Maybe he thinks beauty is free." Linda crossed her arms. "Next time, use the back gate," she said sharply. "People like you shouldn't be seen where guests of honor walk." Daniel didn't argue. He simply handed her the package, an engraved glass vase, and replied quietly, "Beauty and status fade, Miss Linda, but kindness never does." His voice carried a strange authority that made her pause, though she quickly brushed it off. As he rode away, the laughter followed him. No one knew that within days, that same delivery man would become the name on everyone's lips, for reasons none could have imagined. That evening, a sudden storm hit Mbarica. Lightning split the sky, and heavy rain washed through the town. The mayor's house was flooded, and the main power lines collapsed. Most of the roads were blocked, but a single motorcycle could be seen cutting through the storm. It was Daniel again, soaked, but steady. He stopped at the mayor's gate, not to deliver, but to help. He led the guards in clearing debris, rescued the mayor's driver trapped in his car, and even carried Linda's grandmother to safety when her wheelchair got stuck. When the storm finally calmed, Linda, still trembling, watched as Daniel worked tirelessly, his hands muddy but his face composed. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, genuinely curious now. He simply replied, "Because when a home is in trouble, you don't ask who lives there. You just help." Before she could respond, headlights approached, sleek black SUVs that stopped outside the flooded gate. From them stepped men in sharp suits, holding umbrellas. They bowed slightly toward Daniel. "Sir," one said respectfully, "the chairman is waiting for you at the estate. We've completed the inspection you ordered." The guard stared, confused. Linda's father stepped forward. "Chairman? What are you talking about?" Daniel wiped his hands and turned to the mayor. "My apologies for not introducing myself properly, Mr. Mutesa. My full name is Daniel Cato, CEO of Cato Holdings." The mayor's jaw dropped. Cato Holdings, the company that funded most of Mbarica's infrastructure, the one investors bowed to. The same man they had mocked for being just a delivery boy was the one keeping their businesses alive. "I like to see my people's struggles firsthand," Daniel continued calmly. "It helps me understand what kind of leaders we really are." His gaze shifted to Linda, whose face was pale with shock. "Sometimes, it's not the poor who lack wealth. It's the wealthy who lack character." From that day forward, the town buzzed with a different kind of gossip. The women who had laughed at Daniel now whispered apologies. The men who ignored him tried to shake his hand. And Linda, haunted by guilt and admiration, found herself thinking about the man who had seen through her pride. Weeks later, Daniel returned to Mbarica again, not as a delivery man, but as a guest of honor at a charity event he had sponsored, one focused on helping street vendors and low-income families. The mayor's family had no choice but to attend. When Daniel stepped on stage to speak, the crowd fell silent. His voice was calm but powerful. "True success," he said, "is not about what you wear or where you dine. It's about how you treat those who can offer you nothing." His eyes caught Linda's across the crowd, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them: regret, hope, and perhaps the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. But just as the applause began, a man in a dark suit appeared at the back of the hall, whispering urgently to Daniel's bodyguard. Daniel's expression changed slightly, a shadow crossing his face. The next moment, he excused himself and stepped outside, phone in hand. The sound of heavy engines echoed from a distance. Something was wrong. And then, Daniel's expression hardened as the sound of engines grew louder, echoing off the narrow streets surrounding the community hall. The people inside continued clapping, unaware of the tension forming outside. His bodyguards, once discreet and calm, suddenly stiffened, communicating in low tones through their earpieces. Linda, watching from the stage, noticed the shift in Daniel's demeanor. He wasn't just the calm, dignified man she had mocked weeks ago. There was a sharpness now, a quiet authority that made even the guards around him move like soldiers awaiting orders. She hesitated for only a second before following him out. Outside, the air was thick with humidity, the scent of wet earth lingering after the storm. Black SUVs rolled into view, but these weren't the familiar company vehicles Daniel used. Their windows were tinted darker, their movements too precise. Daniel's lead guard moved quickly, positioning himself in front of him. "Sir, these aren't ours," he said in a low, firm voice. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know." The vehicles came to a stop, and several men stepped out, wearing expensive suits but carrying the arrogance of hired power. The tallest among them, a man with a scar running across his cheek, smiled thinly. "Mr. Cato," he said, his tone dripping with mock respect. "Or should I say, the man who thinks he can rewrite the order of things in Barica?" The crowd inside the hall began to murmur as whispers reached their ears. Linda's father, Mayor Mutesa, came out, adjusting his tie nervously. "What's going on here?" he demanded, but the scarred man ignored him. Daniel's voice remained calm. "You're trespassing on my property, Malu. I suggest you leave before this becomes something you can't walk away from." Malu chuckled. "Still pretending you're one of them, eh?" The delivery man, who plays saint while taking over the town piece by piece. He stepped closer, eyes glinting. "You may have fooled the poor with your little charity show, but those of us who know your family's past, we haven't forgotten." Linda frowned. "What is he talking about?" she asked softly, looking from one man to the other. Daniel's gaze flickered toward her, but he said nothing. The silence was heavy, charged with unspoken history. Then, in one swift motion, Malu threw an envelope at Daniel's feet. It burst open, scattering old photographs across the wet pavement. Linda bent down, picking one up. The photo showed a much younger Daniel, dressed in torn clothes, standing beside a burnt-down house, holding a child no older than 10. Another image showed a group of men in police uniforms dragging someone away while flames raged in the background. Malu's voice rose, cruel and sharp. "This is what he hides. His father was accused of setting that fire 20 years ago, the fire that killed the Mutesa family's business partner. While your family was building its empire, his was being destroyed for the same land you're standing on." The crowd had gathered now, forming a wide circle around them. Murmurs turned to gasps. The mayor's face went pale as realization struck. "That was the Cato farm," he muttered. We bought that land after the fire." Daniel finally spoke, his tone low but steady. "My father didn't set that fire. He tried to stop it. But when he went to testify, your father's men silenced him, because the land he lived on was rich with oil reserves you didn't want anyone to discover." The air went still. Linda's heart raced. "That can't be true," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Daniel looked at her, his eyes reflecting both pain and calm defiance. "I didn't come back for revenge. I came to finish what he started, to rebuild what corruption destroyed." He turned to Malu. "And I will, whether you stand in my way or not." Malu sneered, signaling to his men. "You always were your father's son, too stubborn for your own good." Before anyone could react, one of Malu's men reached inside his jacket. Daniel's guards moved instantly, swift, efficient. The sound of metal clicking broke the tense air, followed by shouted orders. The townspeople screamed and ducked for cover as the standoff exploded into chaos. Linda froze, unable to move as Daniel grabbed her hand and pulled her behind one of the pillars. "Stay down," he ordered. What is happening?" she stammered. "Old debts," Daniel said grimly. "And people who can't stand to see the truth come out." The fight was brief but brutal. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, the local police finally responding. Malu and his men retreated into their SUVs, speeding off into the dark streets. When the dust settled, Daniel stood in the rain again, his shirt stained, his breath steady but heavy. The mayor approached him, shaking slightly. "If what you said is true, if my father really—" Daniel cut him off. "You don't need to defend him. The documents I found speak for themselves." He handed the mayor a small USB drive. "Inside are files proving how your father's company took over Cato land using forged signatures. The oil money, the construction contracts, all of it came from that theft." The mayor's face twisted with guilt. "I didn't know." "I believe you," Daniel said softly. "But now you do." As the crowd slowly dispersed, Linda remained where she stood, her thoughts a storm of confusion. Everything she thought she knew, her family's honor, her father's legacy, even her own pride, had been shaken apart in a single night. Daniel began to walk away, his guards forming a quiet circle around him. The glow from the streetlights cast long shadows on the wet pavement. Something in Linda's chest ached as she watched him. She hurried after him, her voice barely steady. "Daniel, wait," she called out. He stopped, turning slightly, his eyes softer now. "I didn't know what my father's people did," she said, her voice trembling. "But you could have exposed us from the start. Why didn't you?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment before replying. "Because revenge doesn't rebuild what was lost. But forgiveness might." For a second, the world around them seemed to still, the rain easing into a light drizzle, the streetlights flickering softly in the mist. Linda stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not the man I thought you were." A faint smile crossed his lips. "No, but maybe you'll get to know who I really am someday." He turned to leave, but before he could, one of his guards rushed up, whispering urgently. Daniel's expression darkened again. "What now?" Linda asked, sensing the shift. "There's been a break-in at my office," his guard said quickly. "The main server's been breached, files deleted, including the ones that proved the land theft." Daniel's jaw clenched. "By who?" "We don't know yet, sir. But whoever it was, they had inside access." He took a deep breath, eyes narrowing in determination. "Then it's not over." Linda's pulse quickened. "Let me help," she said suddenly. "If someone in my father's circle did this, I can find out who." Daniel studied her, his expression unreadable. "That could put you in danger." "I've lived comfortably all my life," she said firmly. "Maybe it's time I did something that actually matters." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, slowly, Daniel nodded. "All right, Linda. But once you step into this, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back," she whispered. He turned toward the waiting car, motioning for her to follow. The night stretched ahead, heavy with secrets, betrayal, and a truth buried too long beneath the surface of Mbarica. And as the car disappeared into the darkness, the wind carried faint echoes of what was to come. Whispers of a battle not just for land or legacy, but for redemption itself. The morning sun returned to Mbarica with deceptive calm, a golden glow that washed over the town as if the chaos of the previous night had been a distant dream. But behind that illusion of peace, storms still brewed. The mayor's mansion stood quieter than usual, the gates closed to the public, and whispers carried through the market like restless ghosts. Everyone wanted to know, what would Daniel Cato do next? For 3 days, he remained out of sight. Rumors swirled. Some said he had left town after the attack. Others whispered he was planning something big. The truth, however, was far more intricate. Inside a high-tech compound on the edge of Mbarica, Daniel sat in his glass-walled office, eyes fixed on the flickering screens before him. His entire life's mission, exposing the corruption that destroyed his father, now hung by a thread. Linda had kept her word. Since that night, she had begun quietly questioning her father's old associates, attending social visits that were really subtle interrogations. Each time she returned to Daniel's office, she brought fragments of truth, secret ledgers, old contracts, and names that carried weight like stones. One evening, as the sun set in shades of amber and violet, she walked into his office holding a dusty, leather-bound file. Her hands trembled. "You need to see this," she said, placing it before him. Daniel opened it. Inside were handwritten letters, sealed government permits, and a notarized confession from decades ago. His eyes darkened as he read the signature at the bottom. Moses Mutesa, Linda's grandfather. The confession detailed everything. The land seizure, the fabricated fire report, and the bribes paid to silence the witnesses, including Daniel's father. But the letter's final line caught his breath. Asterisk, if my grandson ever learns the truth, let him know. Greed is a curse that destroys the soul faster than any fire. Asterisk. Daniel looked up at Linda, his voice quiet. You found this where? In my grandfather's study, she said softly. Hidden behind an old painting. My father never knew it existed. But Daniel, it's worse than you think. Someone else has been watching you. Someone who doesn't want this truth to reach the public. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. His security chief's voice came through, tense and urgent. Sir, the man we caught outside last night. He's talking. He says Malu wasn't working alone. There's a network. Politicians, businessmen, even members of the National Council, all profiting from stolen oil contracts tied to your family's land. Daniel's gaze hardened. Then this isn't just about Mbarika anymore. That night, Daniel and Linda drove to the outskirts of town, to a small memorial built on the site of the old Cato farm, now a government storage facility. The land still smelled faintly of burnt wood, even after 20 years. Daniel knelt, running his fingers through the dry soil. My father died trying to prove the truth, he said quietly. He told me once, when you fight evil, son, fight it with honor, not hatred. I didn't understand then. But now, I think I do. Linda placed a hand on his shoulder. You have that honor, Daniel. Even when no one believed you. He turned to her, his voice soft but resolute. It's time everyone does. 2 days later, the town awoke to chaos once again. This time, not from storms or gunfire, but from truth. Every television, every radio, every phone in Mbarika buzzed with the same broadcast, a live press conference from Cato Holdings headquarters. Daniel stood before a sea of reporters, flanked by his team. Linda stood to the side, her heart pounding. He began calmly, his voice carrying weight and clarity. For years, this town has lived under the illusion that power equals virtue. That wealth grants immunity from accountability. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. He projected the documents onto the massive screen behind him. The contracts, the falsified signatures, the confession. The crowd gasped as familiar names appeared, governors, judges, and corporate leaders. This, Daniel continued, is not about revenge. It's about giving back what was stolen. My father's death was ruled an accident. It wasn't. He was silenced because he knew the truth. And today, that truth finally speaks. The mayor, watching from his home, buried his face in his hands. His legacy crumbled before him, but deep in his heart, he knew it was justice. As Daniel finished, the press hall erupted in questions, but he raised a hand. You can arrest me if I've done wrong. You can threaten me, smear me, or destroy my company. But you will not destroy the truth. Outside, thousands gathered, chanting his name, not as a billionaire, not as a hero, but as a man who dared to confront what others feared. But victory did not come without a cost. That evening, as Daniel drove back to his compound, another explosion ripped through the quiet streets. His convoy swerved violently. Flames rose from one of the escort vehicles. Panic erupted. His guards rushed him out as smoke filled the air. In the confusion, Linda's car was nowhere to be seen. Find her, Daniel shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. Find Linda. Hours later, after the fire was contained, a message arrived on his encrypted phone. A video. On the screen, Linda sat bound in an abandoned warehouse, her eyes defiant even through fear. A voice off camera said coldly, "You've exposed too much, Cato. Walk away, or she dies. Midnight. Bring the files." Daniel's blood ran cold. He stared at the screen, his pulse hammering. By 11:30 p.m., he stood outside the warehouse alone, the USB drive clutched in his hand. His guards had begged him to wait for the authorities, but he refused. "If she dies because of me, the truth means nothing," he said. Inside, the shadows stretched long. Malu stepped forward, holding a gun. "You could have been one of us," he sneered. "But you had to play hero." Daniel tossed the USB to the ground. "Let her go." Malu laughed. "You think this ends with you walking away?" But before he could pull the trigger, Headlights flashed through the broken windows. Police and media vehicles swarmed the compound. The entire scene was being live-streamed. Daniel had been one step ahead. Earlier that day, he duplicated the USB, sending it to multiple journalists and the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. "This isn't my fight alone anymore," he said calmly. Malu turned, realizing the trap too late. Gunshots echoed, and in moments, the warehouse filled with shouting officers. The criminals were arrested, the files secured, and Linda freed. When she stumbled into Daniel's arms, tears streamed down her face. "You knew they'd come for me. I knew they'd try," he said, voice breaking slightly. "But I wasn't going to let them win." Days later, Mbarico witnessed something it had never seen before, an apology from the powerful. The mayor publicly resigned, pledging his wealth to rebuild the communities exploited by corruption. Government officials faced trials. The stolen lands were returned to rightful owners. And at the center of it all stood Daniel Cato, once mocked as a delivery man, now hailed as the man who delivered justice. But fame didn't change him. He refused titles, declined awards, and instead founded the Cato Foundation for Integrity, offering scholarships to children of farmers and laborers, the people who reminded him of his roots. During the foundation's inauguration, Linda stood beside him, no longer the prideful heiress she once was, but a woman transformed by truth. She addressed the crowd with grace. "The greatest wealth is not money," she said. "It's the courage to do what's right, even when the world looks down on you." The crowd erupted in applause, but Daniel's eyes were on the horizon, where the rebuilt Cato farm now stood, green again, full of life. He felt the wind against his face and whispered to the memory of his father, "You were right, Papa. The truth always wins, but only when we fight for it with love." The sun began to set, casting the sky in fiery hues of gold and crimson, as if honoring the journey that had brought him full circle, from dust and loss to redemption and legacy. And as the town of Mbarica moved forward, its people spoke of the man who had once been just a delivery boy, the man who carried not packages, but purpose, not wealth, but wisdom. Daniel Cato didn't just change their town, he changed their hearts. And though many years would pass, his story would continue to echo through generations, a reminder that greatness often wears humble shoes, and that sometimes, the one you look down upon is the very one sent to lift you higher. But far away, in the shadows of another city, a figure watched Daniel's speech on a flickering screen, eyes cold, lips curling into a quiet smile. "So the boy finally learned to fight," he murmured. "Good. Because the real war has just begun." The screen went dark, and somewhere deep within Daniel's soul, an old storm began to stir once more.